Today we're on the Isle of Wight on the 200th anniversary of the birth of Queen Victoria. We're at Osborne, the summer home she and Prince Albert cherished. In 1844, the royal couple visited the Osborne estate. They were enchanted. The Queen wrote, "It's impossible to imagine a prettier spot. We have a charming beach, all to ourselves. We can walk anywhere without being followed or mobbed." Victoria had her own bathing machine constructed so that she could change in modesty and she could enter the water. In 1845, Albert set to work designing both the house and the gardens himself. And Albert, who once complained that he was often the husband and not master of the house, realised that Osborne would allow him his own grand project to indulge in his great passions of landscape design, gardening and education. And with 9 children, there was a lot of educating going on during the lengthy spells the family spent at Osborne. At the heart of Albert's education programme was a replica Swiss cottage and these gardens. Had their own museum where they could exhibit stones, shells, fossils they found on the beach or in the gardens here at Osborne, or cherish mementos from foreign trips further afield. Let's hope our experts make some important finds as the Roadshow gets underway on the terrace.
You brought in this fantastic looking box, which is beautifully enamelled with Victorian stamps. Are you a stamp collector or got some connection with stamps?
I'm not a stamp collector, but there is in my family background a relative who was involved in developing the postal service in the whole of Devon and Cornwall and is recorded for having been involved in that service. So my interest is to know whether this has any connection with that.
Right, well, when was he, do you think, involved in setting it up?
That would have been in the mid-1800s,
right.
So I believe.
Well, what you've got here is a sort of Rolls-Royce of stamp boxes. It's not for putting old stamps in, it's what, if we open it up, it's what you put the current stamps in of the day. And so these are sprung, so you've piled the stamps in there, and every time you want a letter, we turn it round, we can see it's got hallmarks on it. Maker's mark GH for George Heath, but for you, most interestingly, a date letter 1891. So I think this doesn't have an immediate connection if he was active in the 1850s. But I don't know how long he lived, but I would have thought it was
Nor
unlikely.
how accurate I am about the date.
By the way, the other name on it, W. Thornhill, is Walter Thornhill, who was a very well-known retailer in London. But the point about this is the enamel is superb. The condition is superb. Also, this is highly collectible. People collect all sorts of stamp boxes, but when they are this good, they're really sought after.
Oh.
So it's got to be worth at least £2,000.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Well, that's exciting. Wow. A little stamp box. I might become a stamp collector.
This is a first for me, to be looking at the replica of a building that's right behind us.
It's different, isn't it? It's 35, 40 years now. My mother bought it back in the early 80s from a shop in Ryde.
And what did she pay for it?
£40. But it's a lovely model and it's been in the family for a long time. My mother's longer with us, but I know nothing about it. From a point of age, we did ask somebody many years ago about the model and they could age it, and they said part of the building is missing.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a gift, really, for ageing it, because we know that Osborne House wasn't completed until 1851, so it's really unlikely that it's going to be before 1851. And as you say, there was a whole section here, the Durbar wing, that was added in 1890. So as far as a date goes, it is between 1851 and 1890, but very difficult to be any more precise than that because it's not factory made. What do you think about the workmanship?
The workmanship is really good considering the age of it. I mean, bear in mind the glues back then weren't very good. It is cardboard and it is wood in construction. I know that for a fact because one of the towers fell off. and I could see the wood underneath it. So they've clad it.
You sound incredibly knowledgeable on this. Have you ever had a go at this sort of thing yourself?
Well, when I left school, I decided my career would be model making. The closest thing I've done to this was I worked on the first series of Thomas the Tank Engine, building the background sets or the engine sheds, that sort of thing, a long time ago, though.
Right, I see a direct link then between this and something in your question alongside the age of it is why was it made? And of course there were scale models made by architects' offices, but I don't think in this instance that's what it is. And the little gift for us that points us, I think, in the direction of it being tourist wear is there are various sort of subtle inaccuracies. This central building here is slightly taller in reality, and it's done to scale, but it's very difficult to be highly accurate. And then the top of the viewing towers, it's more cottage industry. It would originally have had a glass dome over it, but it survived reasonably well. So what would a desirable property like this be worth on the open market now? £1,000?
Really? Wow. That's quite impressive. I'll make a case for it properly from that costing. Excellent, thank you.
We've got a collection of items here, and we have a chilling quote from this book. And it says, "Judging from the agony expressed by the patient's hands, he is undergoing the tortures of the damned." That's a quote about your dad, isn't it?
It is.
Was he really like that?
Not at all, but he was a dentist.
Ah.
And he was the dentist in Colditz.
Colditz.
Yes.
So he was a prisoner of war?
He was, yes.
He was captured when?
He was captured in 1941 in the Battle of Crete.
Uh-huh. And he ended up at Colditz because he was a dentist?
Exactly, yes. The prisoners, if they needed dental treatment, had to be taken down into the little town of Colditz. And that was presenting too much opportunity for people to do a runner. So they decided to draft in a dentist who was already a prisoner of war, and they brought in my father.
Now, as a dentist, he's part of the Army Medical Corps. He's not
Yes.
actually supposed to escape.
No, indeed.
Yeah. Did he have anything to do with the escapes, though?
Well, he did have at least the beginnings of a tunnel dug underneath his dental chair. And it was discovered, I think, before it got very far.
Okay.
And there were no particular repercussions. Apparently this was almost an everyday thing for the German guards, yet another tunnel.
Yep.
And I think his other contribution to attempts to escape was that he made a couple of spars for the Colditz glider, which was constructed in the attic.
In the attic?
Yes.
So he was part of the actual glider construction?
He was,
which is a very
yeah.
famous part of the Colditz story.
Absolutely, and of course it was never used, and we don't know if it actually would have flown, but he was involved in its construction.
That's superb. And where did these lovely tins come from?
So these tins originally came food parcel,
Yeah.
but they were put to another purpose once they'd eaten the contents, which was to use them to excavate tunnels, to use them to dig soil out.
So this Klim tin,
Yes.
which is the one which is sort of most known during escapes, I suppose,
Yeah,
because
yes.
it's just an iconic piece of equipment from a prisoner of war camp. But this one actually used in one of the tunnels, perhaps at Colditz.
Yes, indeed.
They're fantastic things, aren't they? Again, they take us back in time to those moments
Yeah.
when they were locked in that castle. They didn't know the war was going to end the way it did.
No.
And their motive was to get back and start fighting again.
Absolutely.
It's quite historic things.
Yes.
It's very hard to put a price on two old tins. I'm going to be honest with you. But it's not about the tins. It's
No.
about where the tins come from, and it's about the tins' association with your man, and it's about what they represent as a part of World War II history.
Indeed, yes.
I think a collector would quite happily pay £500 for this collection. Easily.
Well, I wasn't planning to sell them. I think my children and grandchildren would love to have them.
I think there's a lot of collectors out there that would absolutely just so want these things. And who hasn't heard of Colditz?
Absolutely.
Well done, Dad. Thanks for bringing them in.
Thank you so much.
So you're going to introduce me to your feline friend?
Yes, this is Canny Hill. It was on the Antique Roadshow. I'm not sure whether it was...
Not this cat.
Not that actual one, but a Canny Hill cat, which is treacle clay is more or less the same as that. Either end of the 80s, 90s. They valued it at about 1,000 at the time. A friend of mine offered me 800 quite a few years ago, turned her down.
Well, I think we better start with going back to Canny Hill.
Right.
Because not many people have heard of the Canny Hill pottery.
Well, I hadn't.
No. Well, it was in County Durham,
Right.
Bishop Auckland, I think. And this is typical of the kind of wear that's attributed to them, with this, as you say, treacle glaze.
Yes.
But the glazes have been allowed to run and give this sort of streaky effect. Almost looks like cat's fur, doesn't it? It's really quite fortunate. But also really rather nice and very delicately done is the way the cat's eyes have been picked out.
Yes.
And the face and the mouth. I think that cat's got character. And you say you were offered money for this cat?
Yes, a friend of mine, Sue, she offered me 800. She's been after it for ages. She dabbles in antiques. She's a great girl, and she offered me 800.
Does she watch this programme?
All the time.
Drat.
She does.
Do you know why?
Well, because it's going to be less than
It's
that.
only worth 500.
Oh, is it? It's not the value.
Take her out on the night that is broadcast so
Right.
she doesn't see it. And then phone her up and say she can have it for 800.
No, I wouldn't do that. She can have it. She can have it. I hung on to it because I couldn't part with it because it was Dad's, but to be honest, I've got nowhere to put it.
Well, here we are. We're in a sea of nostalgia here. We are surrounded by 120 drawings for children's books of the mid-20th century. Tell me about them.
The artist was my mum, Mary Gurnett, and she started working for Armada Paperbacks, I think around about 61 or 62, and then she carried on for about a decade years.
And if we can say that a cover does not sell a book, it's a lie, isn't it? Because these covers are absolutely fantastic.
Well, that was one of the things. It was a kind of like a marriage made in heaven for Armada Paperbacks. They found my mum, and her painting style of movement and life and children, very colourful.
We've got Enid Blyton here. She did a lot of Enid Blyton, didn't she?
She did 38 Enid Blytons that we know of, yeah.
Well, Enid Blyton wrote 800 books, but
I know.
so 38's not bad, I suppose. This one particularly intrigues me, The Mystery of the Vanished Prince. Now, tell me about that one.
It was one of the various mystery books that she illustrated for 2 or 3 of my brothers that she used as models.
And were you paid for this?
Well, we were paid in, show my age a bit here, but either half-p's or old pennies.
Oh, she got away cheaply, didn't she?
She was fast.
Absolutely, absolutely incredible. Tell me, was she a good mother? Did she look after you well?
She was a fantastic mum. 4 small boys to look after.
4 small boys?
Is
that the picture of you over there?
This is a picture of, mum with the 4 of us, and I'm the second from the left.
Still squinting in the sun?
Still squinting in the sun, that's
yes,
right.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
But
that's a lovely picture of us.
Yes, yes, that's splendid. Thank you. Well, not only did she do Enid Blyton, I see she went on to Bunter over there, Billy Bunter, Frank Richards.
Yeah, she did quite a few Billy Bunter covers.
I see you've got some Richard Crompton there as well.
That's right, yes. Well, Jimmy with a spin-off from the William books, of course, that we all know. And in this particular one here...
Show me.
That would, again, I think that was probably myself and my older brother acting as models for her.
Well, you had a lot more hair in those days.
Thank you for that. Yeah. And one of Mum's doodles, you can see here, that actually the top one here is actually the image that she used in the picture here.
Oh, I think that's absolutely wonderful. That's
Yeah.
quite incredible. But I suppose, I don't know if I could say that they're my favourite early Doctor Who, isn't it?
It is.
This shows William Hartnell, who was the first
right.
Doctor Who.
That's right, yeah.
With the Crusaders.
That's right,
Him
yeah.
dressed as sort of Friar Tuck or something,
Yep.
something like that.
It was an oddity in a way. She didn't, as far as I know, do any other covers, but just that one.
And I would imagine for Doctor Who fanatics, that's quite a
They love
collectible
it.
item.
They have been in contact with me and getting hold of me, and yes, they love the
They
fact
want it, do
they would love it, yes.
Well, we've got to come to evaluation, haven't we? So 120, it's very difficult to do. I think you've probably got about £10,000 worth of stock. Yeah.
Wow. I wasn't expecting anything like that much. Thank you very much.
Holy cow, or in this case I think bull actually. Tell me more about him.
Well, originally he come from Queen Victoria's farm on the estate, and my great uncle was carter for Queen Victoria, and he ended up with this somehow. I don't know how it It's always been in the families.
Well, of course, this was very much the vogue in the Victorian period, wasn't it? These baronial halls filled with all sorts of trophies, as these were often seen, or sort of fabulous specimens such as this steer. Of course, then it changed in the 1960s and 1970s. It became dreadfully distasteful, and these things went enormously out of fashion. They were burnt and destroyed. But he seemed to have survived. Obviously, your family loved him. Are you a sort of farming family?
Yes, we are a farm.
Really?
We farm just up the road, yeah.
So you'll probably know exactly what he is then?
I'm not quite sure what his breed is, but he's supposed to be some Spanish steer.
So we might not know exactly what breed he is, but we know that what we're looking at is an extremely large and very nicely taxidermied bull's head. I suppose when you think about it, it's a royal patron, so she'd have chosen a very, very good taxidermist, and I think that really shows through in the modelling. Yeah. And I think because of his size, and because of the fact that these things are very hard to replicate today, you can't produce a bull's head like this for various laws and restrictions. It's really well modelled, and it's got royal patronage. So I think we're looking at somewhere between £1,000 and £1,500.
Really? Didn't think he'd be worth anything.
And where did he live at home?
Well, actually in the downstairs, above the downstairs loo.
So will he get upgraded now? Will you take him out of the loo and maybe put him pride of place? Thank you so much, and welcome home, boy.
Right, thank you.
Do you know, I've been working in the antiques business for over 30 years, and I've seen some amazing cradles and cribs, but I've never ever seen one quite like this. And it's absolutely gorgeous, isn't it? I mean, it is ostensibly a proper miniature version of a clinker-built boat. I also happen to know but there is another one that is literally identical to this in the Royal Collection here at Osborne House.
And that's where the story started from.
So how come you've got one that looks the same?
Well, my great-aunt had a stall at the church fete in East Cowes, and the Queen gave permission for them to hold it on the lawn at Osborne.
Right, OK.
So my great-grandfather was so pleased with this, and that Aunt Kate had a stall at this, that he commissioned a cradle boat. He had it built locally, right, and his daughter had it on the stall, and the Queen bought it.
Right, OK.
And so Greg was so thrilled that he commissioned another one as a memento for his daughter to keep.
And this is essentially
this one. Yes.
What I love about this is it's quite sort of innovative in a way. We've got this really lovely little kind of fucking if we want to, very simple mechanism. Just pop that across like that and there we go, it's done. I love the little inscription here. The boat is called Cherub. For obvious reasons, that ties in beautifully with the idea of a sort of a little cherub of a baby lying inside this cradle. Did any of your children ever get put in this?
Oh, they were put in it. Alice was put in it. My granddaughter was put in it
there.
when she was small.
So you've kind of almost rocked in a royal cradle then. Yeah. So I think if we look at the family history, of course, it's not actually a royal cradle, so to speak, but it seems to have a good direct connection by the looks of it. And I suppose if we try and put a value on it, I think if it went to auction, it would be likely to fetch £2,000 to £3,000.
Ooh.
To be honest with you, what is lovely is it sort of feels like it's come home today, doesn't it?
Very exciting having it here.
Yeah, and it's been a pleasure to talk about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And here, in a few confident lines that could only be by Augustus John, is an early drawing of his muse and girlfriend and long-term mistress, Dorothy McNeill, known as Dorelia, with whom he shared his early years in a ménage à trois with his wife. So it's a really exciting find to see a drawing as good as this. How is it yours?
It was given to me as a housewarming present by a very old friend, and at the time I didn't accept it because I didn't think where I was living was the best place to have it. So she looked after it for another 4 years, but then I moved.
Do you love it?
I do.
Why?
Absolutely love it.
Why?
She seems so real. She seems very, very vibrant. As you say, with just a few lines.
I think in nature she was very, very quiet and serene in character. She was a wonderful sitter. She'd sit there for hours, and she had the most beautiful face in repose. So I think John just found in her the perfect woman, really. In fact, it was Augustus's sister Gwen who first met Dorelia, and it's through her that Augustus knew her. They all went on the road together in caravans in the 1900-somethings.
And with the children, because he had children by both Ida, his wife, and Aurelia, painting as they went. A lovely drawing. The face is a bit sort of weaker, don't you think, or at least less defined than the dress, which seems very confident.
It is. On the back, it certainly mentions that it was restored in the 1980s.
I was a bit worried about that because I think it has been. It's lost a bit of the freshness. You know, there's incredibly quick work here with the charcoal, and it's lost a little bit of surface, which is a shame. And it looks as though certainly you can see a shadow left by a previous mount where the paper is slightly discoloured. Not that that's serious. None of it's too serious. In terms of value, Aurelia is the most sought-after sitter of all John's drawings, I would say. The romance of her name is what does it. And were this in perfect condition, I would have put £10,000 to £15,000 on it.
Goodness.
But since it isn't, I've got to go a little bit lower. In fact, I've got to go about half that, I'd say, £4,000 to £6,000.
Still very nice.
It is a lovely
She's
drawing.
beautiful.
It really is.
Well, these are two kind of disparate objects, really, but something unites them. And you were like the 5th and 6th in the queue this morning as you hit my table. And tell me how the bottle came into your life.
The farm where I was born, one of the buildings had been there for 60 odd years. And when my parents eventually sold, we got in there to find that the rain had got in. There were carriage lamps rotted, horse harness rotted, and this was the one thing that was still okay.
Okay, and how did this come into yours?
I found that glass full of odd glasses on the pavement outside a charity shop.
So you both found them. That's what unites the two objects. This is pennies from heaven. Interesting, they're both British. We know the date of this one because it says WB 1781 on there, so I reckon it's probably from about 1781. And this one comes from about 1730, 1740. And yours is a cylinder bottle sealed with initials and date. That's desirable. That is a collector's item. And your glass, what do you reckon it was for?
Well, whatever went in there must have been pretty strong.
Pretty strong. Cordials is what this. So every home had made its own cordials. Ladies' drink. The ladies withdrew to the withdrawing room in order to sip cordials whilst the gentlemen drank port around the dining table. That's how this fits in. And where they're united in the fact that they are serendipity, the serendipity gets better, guys, because that's worth 800 to 1,000 quid. And this one is worth 800 to 1,000 quid.
So don't you?
Drinks are on you!
Time to put our thinking caps on. It's our Changing Fortunes Challenge, where Richard Price, you brought along 3 clocks, and the idea is to see, in the 40 years the Antiques Roadshow has been on air, which of these has gone up massively in value, which has just about kept pace with inflation, which has actually lost value. And folks, I'd like you to give me a hand with this, because, yes, clocks have never been my specialty. It is yours though, Richard, so tell me about these.
Well, we'll start with the one nearest you, Fiona, which is a French carriage timepiece by one of the best makers, Henri Jacquot. Just a good quality timepiece, about 1885, 1890. Then we come on to this French lighthouse clock, which I haven't wound up.
It's rather gorgeous, that, isn't it?
It's fun, isn't it? Just prior to 1900. And when it's wound up, the light itself, the lamp rotates, so you've got the barometer on the back and 2 thermometers. So that's a bit of fun.
So it's an all-singing, all-dancing clock.
Yes. And then this is pure, one of the best makers. This is about 1850, just classic English clockmaking.
So when we're trying to make an assessment of how the value of these things has changed over the last 40 years, what should we be looking for?
A lot of things have changed because we've had some fantastic research and textbooks printed on this stuff. And there was a book on carriage clocks that came out in the early 70s, which put all sorts of things to rights. Then we had lots of interest, particularly from the US, on these industrial type clocks, and the French made many. But this sort of thing has always been very, very commercial. So I'm not going to give you too much more information because you've got to make a decision.
So what were these worth 40 years ago?
That in the early 70s would have cost you retail £100.
Okay.
Which equates now to about 1,600. That would have been about £25, so about 400. That one was absolutely top of the range of its type, and that was about £45, so that's about 750 in today's money.
Right. Well, what I know about clocks can be written on a postage stamp. So, folks, I need your help with this. So the one that 40 years, my money's on this one, but partly because I like it so much. I think it's so charming. Any other ideas other than that? Or what do we think? OK, so you think that one and you think this one. So we all think a different one. What about the one that's not kept pace with inflation 40 years? The one nearest me. See, that's the one I think as well. Well, it's tricky, isn't it? Yes, yes. Well, we've all come to a different conclusion about which one has gone up most in value, but I'm going to stick my neck out because I think the one nearest you is so exquisite and was so valuable 40 years ago that it still is as valuable as that now. I think this has gone up most in value. Mm-hmm. This one, this style is something we see so much of. Even though it's a beautiful example of its kind, it has decreased in value over the 40 years. Who agrees with that analysis, incidentally? OK, hardly anybody. Right. OK, Richard.
OK, well, let's start with the one nearest you, which has, in real terms, gone nowhere. So you're right on that one.
OK.
Sadly. Retail then would have been, as I said, equates to about 750. Retail 900. This one, which you recognised as being a very, very beautiful thing, retail now £5,000.
Wow.
So that's done pretty well, hasn't it? 1,600 to 5,000.
Very well.
And the £25 one, all those years ago, so do you think that's above or below this one?
Well, what I thought was this one had relatively gone up more. And so this one had skyrocketed relative to its value 40 years ago.
Fiona, I really don't know how to tell you this, but you're right.
Oh,
you're right.
And most of you thought it wasn't. Thank you, those of you who put your hands up.
So the £25, which equated then to 400 quid, £6,000. So that is a serious leap. And what it's basically proven is that the novelty items in the current market have done immensely well against the classic, if you like, slightly boring bits of horology, or the classic things that were very expensive anyway at the time.
And it just tells us how our tastes and fashions have changed.
Absolutely.
Doesn't it?
Yep.
Because this, clearly 40 years ago, no one was interested in that kind of thing.
This was considered a trinket, a novelty item then, a bit of fun. So the proof of the pudding is there.
Well, perhaps the ultimate in environmentally friendly antiques, the humble coconut.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you get it?
It was given to me by my great aunt.
Right. We have a name, W. Doble. Who was he?
That was my great-great-great-grandfather.
OK. And what did he do? Was he...
OK, he was in the Royal Artillery.
OK.
And he spent 7.5 years in the Caribbean. He was in Barbados. Okay. He had a son in Grenada.
Gosh. So I imagine he was on garrison duty.
Okay.
We're looking at perhaps 1830s, 1840s. It must have been an interesting time. Well, this is made of what I always call the poor man's mahogany.
Okay.
This is really packaged food and drink, because the coconut gives you a fabulous meat and then, of course, a very hydrating drink, and you can carve the packaging when you're finished.
Right.
Well, with time on his hands out in the West Indies, I think he may have carved this himself. He's put his own name on it in this lovely script. He's put the regiment's crest. And notice it says ubique. That means everywhere, because this particular regiment literally had fought practically on every continent in the world since the early round, because there's a gorgeous and very relevant compass rose with lots of detail, the whole face with all the directions picked out. But there's more, isn't there? The actual nozzle. Now, normally these two eyes form the eyes of a sort of a monster that we loosely refer to as a bugbear, but this is an anchor, and the little zinc mounts here are carved in the same way as a compass with lots of little points, and there we are, zinc line nozzle. But that's as far as the zinc went, because the coconut is a natural receptacle, probably for, I don't know, a drink, maybe powder for the guns. Who knows? What does it mean to you then?
Okay, just sentimental.
Sentimental values, yeah. And have you traced his sort of family tree since? I mean,
his brother was in Mauritius and St Helena as well,
right.
and they're both from Cornwall. And his brother went back and ran a pub there afterwards. So, and then Royal Artillery in the family for a long time, many generations. So,
right. So a lot for you to go at, and I'm sure you're wondering what it's worth. Well, there's a lot of history in a nut. It's got a lovely colour and patina. In auction, I would pitch this around the £400 to £600 mark.
Okay, well, staying with.
So you couldn't get two more different objects on the Antiques Roadshow, really? Tell me the story.
Well, I inherited this vase about 30 years ago, and my son, a teenager at the time, was into skateboarding, and he came home with this and said, "Mother, this will be a classic one day." And I said, "Load of rubbish. If you want a classic, this is it, my vase."
Oh, fighting talk, fighting talk.
Indeed.
So what's your relationship with the skateboard?
This is my husband's skateboard. It's been hanging on for years. And he always tells me it's his pension fund.
Whoa! Well, so what we have is a Wedgwood Portland vase, copied from a piece of Roman cameo glass by Josiah Wedgwood in the late 18th century. This one is 19th century, and you're absolutely right, it's a classic. And we know it's slightly earlier than later because the figures are undraped. Because later on the Victorians got a little bit sensitive to that and started draping the figures. So this is 19th century, lovely classic blue, and you love it.
I do.
Yes. And this is a classic piece of skateboarding art, and by the most famous firm, Powell and Peralta, Mike McGill. Do you happen to know what he paid for it?
£20.
£20. Smart young teenager is all I'll say. To date, you're both doing okay.
Okay.
Wedgwood prices have gone down a bit. They've sort of slightly gone out of fashion, but this is a classic.
It is.
It's a good colour. So if you'd actually bought this 30 years ago, you would probably have paid $1,000, $1,200. This is a nice example, so it's probably $600 to $800. So the prices have dipped a bit.
Right.
But if I'm looking at this, at £20 30 years ago, it's been a pretty good investment. I don't think we're talking pension money.
Really?
Not yet. Not yet. But I think we're saying actually an equal value to the Wedgwood. So I think this would be £600 and rising. So if I was asked to predict which is going to increase most in value, which I don't like to do, I'd have to go for the skateboard.
Wow.
So it wasn't such a waste of £20.
He has a good eye.
He's got a good eye.
Where do you keep this in the house?
It's in a cabinet in the kitchen.
Where did you get it from?
It was passed down to me from my mother and several generations before her.
Okay. It's made of glass.
Yeah.
Bet you knew that.
Yes.
It's a casket, and they've made the casket out of glass with great difficulty. Not an easy thing to do, to make this shape. It's going to be made in a mould.
Yeah.
And then they've coated it in rhubarb. And then they've wheel cut it. they have a machine with a spindle, and out of that comes a little wheel, and they hold this up to it and do that in the right places to get these cuts. And you can see some of them are very fine and small. So we're talking about very fine, delicate work. Then if you want the deeper, and then you can actually model it. So you cut deeper and it will look as if it's sticking out this way. A fine bit of craftsmanship. And you've got these scrolls on here. And in fact, we've got stags and does all the way round. And the great thing about this is, if you hold it up, that really comes to life with the sun behind it. The mount was originally gilt all the way around and has now almost gone off. It was made in Bohemia, which is what we now call Czechoslovakia, more or less. They specialised in this class of work. It dates about 1860. And of its kind, it's a really very nice one. I think if you put that into auction, you would probably get £1,000 to £1,500 for it.
Ooh, that's nice.
Not bad for a kitchen cabinet.
No.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And in your pouch, you went and grabbed out this necklace, but at first I only saw the blue sapphire, and I thought it's going to just be a pendant on its own.
Yeah.
But then, as it started unravelling, I could suddenly see a yellow one, and a pink one, and then another yellow one, and another pink one. I thought, oh, this is fantastic, because it's not often that I get to see the different coloured sapphires all on one necklace. The only one that's missing is green. This, to me, is a wonderful example of sapphires that actually haven't been heated and treated then as nature intended. And this pink sapphire here, I just think is a gorgeous colour.
Isn't it?
Isn't
Yeah,
it gorgeous?
very nice.
Now, this is a piece that was made in about 1900, but can you tell me what the family history is about this?
Sure, yeah. This belonged to my grandmother originally, and she passed it then down to my mother on her birthday, who then passed it down to my wife on her 21st birthday as well. My grandmother, I believe, got it in Ceylon because her husband used to work on the tea plantation. He managed one of the tea plantations out there. That's as much as I know about it, I'm afraid.
Well, and all of the Sri Lanka, as we obviously know now. So we are seeing these stones that haven't been tampered with in any way, other than they've been cut to maximise their colour and their brilliance. And it's such an elegant jewel, and it's been set with this, we call it knife wire edges. This are very fine, delicate.
It is very fine, isn't it?
And even though it's set in gold, it's just the stones you're seeing. You're not seeing any metal, really. And you say that all the ladies, they all wear them when they're 21 years old.
They were given it at their 21st birthdays, yeah.
And have you got daughters?
Yes, we have. Yep, she's past her 21st. Because my wife likes it, so I'm not going to get it either.
I think it'll look very nice on you,
It's a shame, isn't it?
So it's just skipped a generation for the moment, though.
For the moment,
For
I'm
the
sure.
moment.
I'm sure.
So, you know, at auction, I would be looking at around about £1,500 to £2,000.
Wow, that's amazing. Brilliant.
I think it's lovely. So,
good.
Your wife will continue to enjoy
it. She loves it. She loves it.
And your daughter will a little bit later.
I'm sure. I'm
Okay.
sure she will.
Thank you.
It's hair, obviously.
Yes.
It doesn't look like human hair, so what is it?
It's the hairs of Red Rum, the famous racehorse.
He won how many Grand Nationals?
3.
So even if you know nothing about horse racing, you've heard of Red Rum, haven't you?
I'd hope so.
I'd say.
I'd hope so.
How did you come to have hairs from what I assume is Red Rum's tail?
Well, they were acquired at an auction which is held in the Durbar room of this wonderful place.
Oh, which is the Indian suite of Osborne House.
And at that auction, which I was asked to conduct, these were donated for the auction. And along with a number of wonderful other things, the Queen Mother sent a travelling rug. We had books from Alan Titchmarsh and Catherine Cookson. And we raised nearly £3,000. That's over 20 years ago. And my late father, who loved red rum, fortunately bought them. And he bought the hares of red rum.
Now, did you know that red rum, because he was so famous, was paraded? He had one of the longest retirements in horse racing history, so he was paraded around open stables around the country, and it was quite common for a little bit of his tail to be snipped off and handed out. So
I understand that.
There's actually quite a lot of red rums,
I'm sure,
tail hairs around the country. So the value is not going to be particularly great.
It's not the value. It's the sentiment of having the hare won a lot of money on him because he bet every time he ran.
I think he probably won a bit more money than it's worth now, sadly.
Absolutely.
Well, in all my 10 years on the Roadshow, I have to say, it's the first time anyone's brought me hairs from the tail of a horse. So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
When you think of cows, it's almost impossible to not think of sailing. What have you sailed in with today?
Well, I've sailed in with a visitor's logbook for a yacht which was registered with the Royal Yacht Squadron called Valdora, and it was owned by a person called Sir William Portal.
And how did it come into your possession?
Well, I'm a collector of Isle of Wight memorabilia, in particular with yachting and the Royal Yacht Squadron, and I came across this item in a market in London.
Brilliant. Well, the album is filled with things like newspaper clippings and autographs of people, and one of the photographs is a lovely photograph here of him with his crew.
Oh yes, yes.
And they're wearing these splendid jumpers which say Valdora on them.
Yes.
And there he is, sat in the middle there, looking
with the King's Cup.
With the King's Cup, exactly, which the yacht won in 1922, I think.
That's correct. That's correct.
And they were obviously very, yeah. And I think there's actually a photograph in this album of that's the yacht there during the race.
In full sail, yes.
In full sail, absolutely.
Yes.
And there were quite a lot of celebrity guests, weren't there, on the boat?
A lot of celebrity guests, a lot of very well-known titled people, members of the Royal Yacht Squadron, and royalty.
Well, this is Princess Beatrice, who was Queen Victoria's youngest daughter.
Yes.
And she's obviously signed the book here, but she signed it on many occasions because she came back, obviously had a great time on the yacht.
I think so. I think Sir William Porter was a very generous host.
There are so many famous names in here, sort of members of the aristocracy and political classes. And
that's right.
I think it would have a huge interest to collectors and people who sail today.
I'm sure, yes.
If it were to come up at auction, I would expect it to make something in the region of £1,000.
Would you indeed? Right. Well, thank you for that.
Thank you very much for bringing it.
Thank you.
Well, this is a little jewel that we have before us here. How did it tumble into your life?
I went over to the charity shop across the road from where I live and bought it for £1 because I liked the look of it.
Well, I'm going to confirm that you've got really good taste. I mean, it is a little jewel. And when you look at something like that, one might imagine that this had something to do with René Lalique, because, of course, it's opalescent in exactly the way that Lalique glass is almost defined. And yet, this is not French, this is English. It was made in Gateshead in about 1875. So Lalique was probably just a little baby when this was made. And there's a clue as to who made it, because if we look under the base, there's a little logo here.
Yeah.
And that little logo is a stylized peacock. And that signifies that it was made by George Sowerby and Co. And Sowerby were pressed glass makers. This is pressed, so it's not blown. It's Lalique glass was. But this is the absolute zenith of Victorian good taste. And what we have is a union of George Sowerby, who was extremely urbane, educated man. He exhibited at the Royal Academy and as a painter. And he got in with a designer called Walter Crane. And this is a Walter Crane piece. We have the swans in the bulrushes. And it's really a beautiful little object in its own way. These are sought after because they're the precursors of where Lalique took pressed glass. There's only one thing wrong with it, because I don't think you can afford washing up liquid. No. I have to say, was it, in a Hoover bag when you found it, or?
It was just right at the back of the shelf, all on its own.
Yeah, well, I think it would benefit from just immerse that in water for 5 minutes, get a toothbrush out, and I tell you, that will zoom. It really will. And your quid in the charity shop, well, it's an easy 100.
Wow.
And if every time you spent a quid in your life, you got 100 quid back, you could afford washing up liquid. Well done.
Thank you.
Good find.
Oh, thank you.
I've seen lots of bronzes that are painted and look very realistic. But I have to say I haven't seen a painted bronze size. Do you think it's an old one or do you think it's a new one?
I think it's old, but I don't know much about it because I come from Berlin and my grandparents always had it in the cabinet under the television. Didn't take any notice of it, but I think she said it came from her mother. Every time I went back home again, they gave me a little something to take back with me as an heirloom thing. And I just thought it was a piece of metal, actually, and I've just been packing it away in the cupboard, or on top of the cupboard.
OK, well, the great thing is you've been able to give it 2 or even 3 generations back. So that gives, I think, as I can forget the first question, I think we can establish that it is an old one. And let's just enjoy it for a moment, because the quality of the actual casting is incredible when one looks at the detail in the mat, for instance, and in the little bits of seed in the basket at the front, and the quality of the casting of the faces of the 2 people here sitting round a cooking pot. Only one person, only one factory, and that was the Bergmann factory in Vienna. And if I can turn it up and just look at the underneath here, let's look at the 2 marks. On the bottom of this figure here, there is a bee in a sort of urn. That's the trademark. And then on the bottom of the basket at the top here, we've also got a trademark slightly hidden by the mat. So, bang, it's got all the marks and the provenance that we're looking for. It's in terrific condition. I'm going to turn it back up the right way now. Your grandparents obviously treasured it, whether it was under the television table or not. And I have to ask you if you like it or not.
It's all right.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
But like I said, I always thought it was a piece of metal, so, it's not until just recently my mum said, have you still got that Indian thing in the cupboard somewhere? And I said, yeah. And she said, oh, I think it's a Bergmann. That's the first time I've even heard of the name, so.
Well done, Mum. Yeah. So, yes, I mean, it's not a typical sort of attractive Bergmann little fluffy animal or a bird or something like that. I think it's going to really appeal to collectors of Bergmann bronzes, of which there are a lot internationally. So much so that I would put the figure at auction at between £2,500 and £3,000.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's the rarity, and it's the complexity of the scene, and it's the quality, which is completely unrepeatable. Well done, you.
Yeah, thank you.
Before our next item, I just want to tell you where the Roadshow's heading this year. Morden Hall Park in London on Sunday the 2nd of June. Lytham Hall in Lancashire on Tuesday the 11th of June. V&A Dundee on Sunday the 23rd of June. Compton Verney in Warwickshire on Tuesday the 2nd of July. Battle Abbey near Hastings on Tuesday the 9th of July. National Botanic Garden of Wales on Friday the 19th of July. Castle Ward, Downpatrick on Thursday, the 25th of July. For more information, visit our website, bbc.co.uk/Antiques Roadshow.
The 1930s just scream about elegance, partying, glamour girls and fun. And looking at this lady here, she comes to be the lucky owner.
Well, it belonged to my brother and his partner who used to collect 1930s memorabilia, had a whole house full of it.
Really?
Yes.
And how long ago did they acquire this one?
Pre-1980, I know that for sure, and I got it sort of mid-80s.
Well, they obviously love their deco girls and their
Yes.
deco ladies.
Yes.
And looking at her, I mean, she just does sum up that era, doesn't it? And it's about that huge change in direction which we see in the 1930s, where these figures became really one of the most popular statement pieces for any living room or drawing room. And I think she's just fabulous. Everything from that wonderful fan down to the hem of her dress just screams of the era. If we look underneath, we've got a lovely clear mark here, which is a little cat standing inside of a house, which stands for the firm of Katsuta. Now, they were based in Thuringia, Germany, and in the 1930s, they were really running at full speed. In fact, it's noted down on their records that actually by about 1930, they had over 500 members of staff producing pieces like this. So when it comes to valuing them, well, we've got to look at the market as a comparison, because around this time there were many other factories doing very similar things all across Europe. Some of the leading makers really are from Austria. In Italy we have the great firm of Lenci. The big money, the big numbers really do come from the Italians. They pack a punch, and a serious punch, closely followed by, I'm afraid to say, the Austrians. So I'm sorry to say that as beautiful she is, she does come in third place. But the market is changing, because as the other two sort of areas increasingly grow in value and go further and further out of people's reach, they have to look for the next one down that they can afford. In today's market, because of the scale, and she is huge, she's a great statement piece, I think at auction you'd be looking for her to be around the £500 mark.
Okay.
She's a gorgeous girl. Continue to enjoy her.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Judith, thank you for being a steward for us today on the Antiques Roadshow. I really hope you've enjoyed it, and I want to say a particular thank you for bringing this picture in for us to see. We're looking at one of the sunniest pictures we've seen all day. Now, it's an oil painting on canvas. It's of a mother and her child basking in the sunshine, and it isn't signed, but there is absolutely no doubt in my mind, because of the subject matter, because of the brushstrokes, because of the colour, because of the way that it's Dorothea Sharp. Now, how did it come to be yours?
Well, my grandmother was at art school with Dorothea Sharp.
Oh, wow. So you have a very personal collection then?
Yes, and she was given 2 or 3 pictures, one of which was given to my aunt, and one was given to my father. This was later on, obviously.
And so your granny would have been at Regent Street School of Art with Dorothea.
Yes.
And the fact that Dorothea, the artist, gave your grandmother this picture, that says a lot about their friendship, I think.
Yes.
And I think everyone will agree that the colour and light and warmth radiates out of the painting.
Yes.
And that was a particular speciality of Dorothea Sharp. She was inspired by the Impressionists, and a particular favourite of hers was Claude Monet. And one of Monet's famous pictures is of a lady standing with a parasol. And if you see here, we've got the mother holding the parasol with her baby, and then she's got her hat lost in the corner. What do you love about it?
The whole sunniness of the picture, the baby, the lights, the background as well. I've always loved the picture all my life.
Oil paint is really hard to manipulate and to move it so fluidly, to capture such a sort of fleeting moment in this really intimate moment. Have you ever had it valued?
No.
Dorothea Sharp's probably one of the most popular early 20th century female artists. There weren't many female artists who exhibited year after year at the Royal Academy. Their pictures were all accepted for over sort of 40 years. And I think if this was to come at auction, a Dorothea Sharp, even though it's not signed, I think we'd be putting an auction estimate of between 10,000 to 15,000.
Woo! Well, that's lovely news, but I'm afraid it's going back over my fireplace, so I can see it.
Well, the heavens may have opened, but it certainly didn't dampen any spirits at the end of our day at Osborne. Our thanks to everyone who joined us on the Isle of Wight. Until next time, bye-bye.